Hello and welcome to day 4 of Python Challenge. Today we're going to talk about functions and without further ado, let's get started. So in programming languages, a lot of time we need to store and reuse certain steps. To do that, we can define, we have two ways. Either the first way is just to write a piece of code several times in multiple locations, and the other option is that we define that piece of code as a function and we call that function wherever we need that. So the way that we define the function in the Python is by def, and after that we put the name of the function, and there is an indentation after that we put the command that we want this function to run, and this part only defines the function. It doesn't do anything. So the way to invoke it is basically by calling its name, and when we do that it will run the piece of code that is inside of it. So for example, if we define thing function here, which has a print hello and a print fun inside of it, when we call the print function, it will print out hello and fun, and for example, we have another print, then we see the output of this print, which is zip, and we call thing again, which will produce hello and fun for us again. So that's how we define a function. We write a repetitive piece of code inside of it that we can invoke it several times in different places in our program, and that's how we call it or invoke it basically. We have two types of functions in Python. The first type is the built-in functions. We already talked about some of them. For example, print, input, type, float, or integer are built-in functions. And the second type, of course, is the functions that we build based on our needs and based on our environment. It's also important to know that when we create a new function, that function name will be considered as a reserved word. So we cannot use that name somewhere else in the program as a variable name, for example, because Python will consider that as a reserved word only for that specific function. Okay, so the other point that we have to know about functions in Python is that some of the functions they use take a piece of information as an input, and we call that piece of information as an argument. So we pass that argument to the function. Functions will do its piece of code on that argument, and it will return a value to us. The next item is, again, as we discussed, we define the function using the def reserved word, and we can invoke or call function by using the name of the function and the parentheses which comes in front of it, and or if we need to pass any argument to that function. So here we have a example of max function. So in this example we are looking for the maximum character that we have in this phrase. The max function will look for the basically the hexagraphic value of that, and in this case the most highest value in this phrase is W, based on the English alphabet order. Basically, we have the opposite function which is called min. In this case, the output of min would be which is of course the opposite of the max, and the output of min, it's here you can see it's blank, because blank, we have a blank between hello and word, and blank is the minimum, has the minimum lexicographic value which will be returned by min function, and the maximum lexicographic value in this, as we discussed, is W, which will be printed out. Okay, so here basically the idea is that we have a string, you're just kind of dissecting the max function. We have a string of hello world that we pass it as an argument. It goes to the function and it will return us the value of the W. So we have an input as a string and output as a string here, and this is basically the max function was built on the was built by the founder of Python. So because it's a predefined function. So, and if we want to kind of dive more deep to it, is basically it will do some operation inside this max function. So it's a somewhere it's defined. We have the max function defined, and within that we have a certain operation which can find the highest lexicographic character in a string. So we also have some type conversions functions. So if you remember on the previous sections we talked about float, which will change an integer to a float with decimal point. We have type function which will return the type of the variable, and we have int function which is not here, but it will change a float number to an integer. So one of the things that we have to remember is that if we do an mathematical calculation with the integer and a floating number, the result will be implicitly converted to a float with decimal point, and it will be returned to us. And of course we can use the int and float option, float function, to change between the integer and floating number with decimal point. We also have some predefined string functions that will convert the string to integer and or basically that's actually in this example is only converting string to an integer. So in this example we see that we assign the string because this is within the quotation mark. Python treat it as a string. So the type, when we do the type of this as well, it will comes back as a string. When we try to add digit 1 to this string, we get traceback because it cannot concatenate string and integer. What we can do is we can use a predefined int function to this variable and change it to an integer. Then when we run the print function trying to add 1 to this variable, which is already an integer, we get the correct variable output, and we don't get the traceback error message. here we are trying to do we assign a string that has no numeric value, so it's basically the type of this is will be saved as a string. But when we try to do the same as we did before and try to change this hello bar to an integer, we get a traceback, meaning saying that this value cannot be converted to an integer. So again, int and floats and type are predefined functions to change the type of the variables that we have in Python. Okay, so we talked about predefined functions. Now we're going to talk about our own functions. So we define the functions as we discussed with the def keyword, following by the parameters that we have. If we have parameters, we have to put them in the parentheses. And then when we get to the body of the function, we should have indentation. And the important point here is to remember that when we define it, it doesn't actually invoke it, or it doesn't actually call this function. So when we write this piece of code, when we define it, we will not have any output because we haven't called it yet. So we just it's a way for us to tell Python that, okay, save this function for us, and when we invoke it, execute these commands that is inside this function, basically. Okay, so here we're just gonna see what's gonna be our output. So we have we are assigning 5 to x. We have print hello, which will come back here. We define print lyric function, and we have 2 print command on it. Because it's a because we're defining this function and we are not invoking it yet, we will not have any output regarding this line of codes that we wrote here. The next line is going to be another print, but because it's not indented, it's outside this defining function code that we wrote. So this will be executed as it is, and we will have yo here. We are going to add 2 to the x, which had already the value of 5 at the beginning of this code, and we're going to print x, which is going to be 7. So we will have 7 at the output. Again, because we only defined the function here and we did not call it, we will not see any of the print statements that were inside this function. Okay, so another point that we kind of mentioned it was we use def to define the function. Once we define it, we can either call or invoke it as many times as we want. And basically this is when we define it, we kind of store it in the Python, and we call, and when we call or invoke it, we're going to reuse it somewhere else. Okay, going back to kind of the previous example that we had, this part is the same, so we will have only hello here. After this, it's also the same, so we will have the yo output here, but here we're gonna invoke that function using the name of the function and the parentheses. So when the code comes to this point, it will go back to this definition and execute these 2 print functions. So we'll have these 2 print function, 2 print code here, commands here, and after this printing is done, it kind of comes back to the next line of the function call, which is going to add 2 to the x that we defined here, and it's going to print x, which is going to be 7. So the difference between this and the previous example was, in this example we actually invoked or called the function that we defined, and now we can see the output that we were intending to see. Okay, so some functions we can call them without passing any extra information to them, but some functions they need some information. We call that information argument. So for example, in the max example that we have to, because max is going to return the highest lexicographic value in our string, we have to give it a string. We have to give it an input or argument. Without that, the function cannot give us back anything, basically. Okay, so we're going to talk about parameters. A parameter is a variable which we use in the function definition. So it's a handle that allows the code in the function to access the argument for a particular function invocation. So here, if you notice, we defined a function called greet with the argument ling. So whatever we send to this function as an argument, it will be stored in ling. So that's going to be the parameter that we have in this function. So in this case, if the input of or the argument is going to be es, it's going to print hola. If the parameter or which holds the argument is equal to fr, we're going to print bonjour. Otherwise, we're going to go print English. So if we use this function and say greet and put en on it, it's going to give us hello. If we do the same with es, it's going to come back with hola, and with the fr, it's going to come back with bonjour. So this is basically how argument is inputted into the variable, into the parameter, basically. So the parameter is where we can take our argument and keep it in our functions. Okay, so we have another concept which is called the return value. So often a function will take its argument, do some computation, and return a value to be used as the value of the function call in the calling expression. The return keyword is used for this. So when we have like a calculation or some mathematical functions inside our function, we use return to basically show the output of our function. That's how we define it, with return. So in this example, we define a function called greet, and we're gonna return hello. So we're gonna call our greet function within a print function, and we're gonna concatenate that with Glenn, and we're gonna concatenate that again with Sally. So our output here is gonna be hello Glenn and hello Sally. because our greet functions has a return keyword of hello. So this is kind of a nested function that we can use two functions within each other. And because we are doing some calculation inside one of them, we're going to use return to pass that result of calculation to the other function. Okay, so here we're going to talk about the example of this. So it's similar to the previous code that we had. Here we're going to define the greet function. It says that if the lang, which is the parameter and is holding our argument, is equal to es, return hola. If that is fr, return bonjour, otherwise return hello. So we're going to do print and do another function inside the print, which is greet en. So the value of this, which is going to be returned, is hello. So this is going to be hello Glenn. This is going to be hola. So the output of this is going to be hola Sally, and the output of this is going to be bonjour Michael. Okay, so basically an overview, we had an argument, it's what we pass it to the function. Parameter is basically where that argument is saved inside the function, and we have the result, which is going to be what value we're going to return inside our function. Okay, we can have multiple parameters or arguments. So one function can have several argument or parameter. Here we define a function called add2 with two parameters a and b. Inside the function we're going to add a and b together, and we're going to return the added value to when this function is called. So here we have we are using add2 for 3 and 5. Within this function, it's going to add 5 and 3 together and return it. So the x will have the value of 8 here. When we're going to print the x, we're going to have 8 printed for us. Okay, so some functions, as we talked, they kind of returning something to us. It's kind of like fruitful. It's a metaphor. But we have some non-fruitful functions which will not have any return value, and we're going to call them, Python calls them as a void function. Okay, so here we talk about when we're gonna use the function command or define a function, and when we're not gonna use it. So if we have a big program with thousands line of codes, and we have a task or several tasks that are very repetitive, we definitely have to use functions. But of course, if our code is quite small and we don't have a lot of repetition, basically we don't need to use that. So summary, we talked about functions, built-in functions, and some examples of the functions that we can write ourselves. We talked about type conversions, we talked about the string conversions, we talked about parameters, arguments, which is the input data that we pass it to the function. We talked about fruitful functions which will return something to us, We talked about non-fruitful functions, which is also called void functions, and we talked about why we need to use functions in the first place. Okay, this is the exercise. I'm gonna have another video for exercise, but yeah, for the time being you can pause the video and think about this. Okay, and the last but not the least, the acknowledgement. This slide and the material used was created by Dr. Charles Severance, and that's gonna be it. Thank you so much for listening.